This is a certified hood classic.
Hello and welcome back to another video. I'm excited to show you guys the finale of my Fulgore build. Obviously I'm finishing up the lower section and I've tested it at a recent con, so I will have some footage from that con at the very end so you can see the whole suit in action. So sit back and I hope you all enjoy the video. As always, to start off, I make a template, just drawing one side, because I'll just mirror it the other way once I transfer it over to foam. So here's my duct tape template, which gets traced onto cardstock to be the more refined template. And once that's done, you can trace that over to your HD foam. In this case, I use 6mm HD foam. And of course, you mirror each side so you get the left and right side as well as the back side and glue it all together. With my halves all glued together, I will attach my pieces from the crotch area, and for the side pieces, I will use Velcro. Continuing on, I already started sketching my design that I want to add onto the underwear, as well as I already installed the Velcro, which you can see I use a bit of scrap foam for the inside that I attach that Velcro to. I made some extra detail pieces for the front that I'll cut out in 6mm foam. With my trim pieces complete, for this main piece I did a straight 90-degree cut on the top and a inward angle cut on the edge, and on these additional pieces I also did a inward angle cut with the exception of the corners. Next up, I applied my contact cement on both pieces and glued them all together. I made a quick template for the lower section of the underwear. Everything is cut at a 90-degree angle with the exception of the top section, which is cut at a inward angle cut, which I then glued on. Each end of these detail strips will have Velcro on those as well, so this will be a double Velcro system. For the strip in the back, I use the tape method, so I'll draw on my design, apply the tape, trace over that, and then cut that out, place it on cardstock, cut it out, boom, and there's your template. I used 10mm HD foam for this piece, so I just glued that all together and glued that onto the underwear itself. And this is how the progress looks so far before I decided to add on the remaining details.
God damn, that old boy thick, son of a bitch.
Of course, I gotta show you how the Velcro actually works. Moving on, I use my wood burner to burn in the details for the back. For the last detail piece, I cut out a rectangle out of 6mm HD foam and removed the center portion just to cut it in half and re-glue it back inside at an offset so it's sitting lower than the remaining portion. And of course, once that was done, I just glued it in place. Next up, I wrapped my leg in cellophane and went over with layers and layers of duct tape and drew on my pattern for the bottom and upper section of the leg armor. And you already know, once that's done, you transfer that over to cardstock to refine your template, and of course you get to trace it over to foam. So here, this is the upper thigh piece, and once that's done, you just flip it over again to do the opposite side. To make the thigh piece a bit easier, I just combine all my pieces together to make one giant template. That way I can reduce all of my seams. I transferred my template to 6mm HD foam and glued my ends together with my contact cement. Once again, I drew on my details, and once I was happy with it, I applied my layer of tape, retraced over it, peeled the tape off, placed it on cardstock paper, and cut that out to create my new template. Once I had all of my pieces all cut out, I can start gluing them all together, starting with the muscle type area. And just as I did the bicep, I left a lip on certain pieces so the top piece can overlap, kind of replicating that muscle look. And once I had all of that assembled, I glued that on to the main portion of the leg. Next, I drew on my details that'll have to be burned in with my wood burner at a later time. Moving on, I made another template and transferred it over to 10mm HD foam. After burning in my detail lines for the little muscle areas, I glued on my detail piece. I made my next template and transferred it over to 10mm HD foam and did an inward angle cut all the way around. I flipped my template and my foam to mark a line on the back where I'm going to make my V-groove cuts. I used my heat gun to heat seal my foam and help it bend into shape. Once I was done, I drew on my details as you can see here and glued it in place. Next up, I used my wood burner to burn in the remaining details on my thigh pieces. This is the ending result before adding on the remaining details. Next up, I made some quick templates to make the hose connections at the top of the thigh piece. This is one of the two rings that will get glued together for one of the hose connections. And this is the corresponding hose connection that gets the ends glued together, and eventually this piece gets glued on to the circle. Now for the other detail piece, before gluing my ends together, I mark the inner circle and cut that out with my utility knife. With the inner circle removed, I can now glue the whole thing together. Once that's done, I can now combine that with my hose connection and glue it together. With my hose connections completed, I now glued them on to my thigh piece. To finish off the details, I cut out a few slices out of my half-round dowel and glued them all in place where they needed to be. With the thigh pieces finally done, I can put these aside to be painted at a later date and start moving on to the lower leg section. I cut out one half of my leg template, transfer that to cardstock paper, and then transfer that to 6mm HD foam. I did flip my pattern so I can make a left side and a right side of that template and start gluing it all together. There is a section on the back that I did not glue, so I can leave room for Velcro, so that'll allow me enough room to get my leg in and out. Of course, for the front here, I did glue the whole front together, while on the back only glued up until the point where it gets to the bottom half of my calf, which I left unglued. For the Velcro attachment, I use a scrap piece of foam, which half of it gets glued directly to the underside of one end of the leg, while the other end of that attachment gets the Velcro assembly, so one end gets the soft side and the other end of the leg gets the actual hook side. Of course, after letting that contact cement dry a little bit, I did add a few drops of super glue to make sure it stays in place when it's glued on. Once again, I used the tape method after drawing on my details. Once I had my details all laid out and transferred over to foam, I started gluing everything together. Here I moved on to my template for the back calf of the leg. And just like the main portion of the leg, I only glued halfway down, so in this case it was down to the black mark that you see midway through the leg. Once that section is done, I just glued it on. Next up, I made a template for my knee, which is only half of a template, so I need to trace both sides to make one complete knee. And of course, on the back end side, I include a series of V-groove cuts in my 10mm HD foam. And once that's all set up and I'm happy with it, I just glued it all together. After assembling the knee, I can now glue it in place at the top of the leg. Next up, I used my circle cutting tool to make these detail pieces and glued them all together. For the main portion on the inside, I just cut out the middle portion and just kept the outsides and just glued those in. I made 4 total and just used my belt sander to clean off the edges. And now with these done, I can put them aside to glue them on later. Next up, I made a template for my hose connection, which I transferred over to 6mm HD foam, but added a border all the way around. That way I can go over that border and add a V-groove cut so I can kind of fold it to kind of give it more shape. I added hot glue within those gaps so it can keep that same shape as well. With all of my pieces fabricated, I'm finally able to start gluing everything together, starting with the little circle details at the top of the leg. After adding my circle details, I can finally move on to the hose connections, which gets glued on each side. After I had the leg complete, I used my wood burner to burn in the last bit of details. To cover up some of my seams, especially on the knee area, I used some quick seal to cover it up and used my hand dipped in a little bit of water to kind of help smooth it out. With the legs complete, I tried them on just to make sure everything fits as it should, and finally move on to the last piece, the shoe covers. I covered my shoe with cellophane and went over that with duct tape, and after I had that done, I drew on the details that I wanted, and once I was happy with it, transferred that over to cardstock to refine my template and transfer that over to foam. Once I had all of my pieces heat shaped, I glued them all together. I was originally going to make this into sections, that way I kept my flexibility when I walked, but I decided to scratch that and just keep it as one solid piece. Doing this does make it hard to get the shoe in as well as getting your foot in, but I was able to make it work for me. I did a quick fitment test with the shoe cover over the shoe, make sure everything fits as it should, and once I was happy with it, I just flipped it over and marked sections where I'm going to add my elastic. I drew on my details just as I did with everything else, so I can do the tape method once more and apply quick seal to cover up my seams as well. With all of my pieces cut out, I applied my layer of contact cement and of course waited a few minutes until it was tacky to the touch and carefully placed everything where it needed to go. After that, I added the little strip that goes at the end of the shoe. Moving on, I carefully glued this little cover plate. Once that was all done, I used half round dowels to add on these little details that go on top. To finish up, I cut out more circle details and removed the inner circle from the main circle just so I can remove the middle portion and glue those half circles back into the inner ring. After completing each of those rings, I can finally glue it onto the shoe. And now for the final step, I just measured out how much elastic I would need, cut it out, and glued it in. Here I'm just testing everything out, making sure that elastic holds up as it should. Now that everything's done, I can finally apply layers and layers of Plasti-Dip. After applying my initial pass of Plasti-Dip, I finished it off with a glossifier to give a nice gloss black finish. For all of the little cybernetic muscle thing areas, I apply a layer of flat steel color. For any areas that needed regular chrome, I started with that first, so I taped off any areas that needed it and applied 2 light coats of regular chrome. After finishing the paint job with black chrome for everything else, I sealed the paint using 2 light coats of Mod Podge High Shine. The last thing I did was add a bit of hot glue on the back side of the knee to add a little bit of foam. That way when it rubs up against my thigh armor, it won't scratch it up too much. So this is the end result, and I love the way it turned out. I could not be happier. So that's the full costume finally come to an end. I want to thank you all for tagging along my Fulgore journey as I went through this. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope to see you guys in the next one and whatever it is that I build. And y'all take care.